Good afternoon. Here is the state of the presidential race as of July 26, 2024. So let's start by filling out solid states. The Democrat column will fill out Washington, Oregon, California, Colorado. Actually, no, we won't fill out Colorado. We'll fill out Hawaii, Illinois, New York, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Vermont, and Maryland, DC, and Delaware. And then for the solid Republican column, we shall fill out Alaska, Utah, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, South Dakota, North Dakota, Nebraska. Nebraska first, Nebraska at large. Maine second is going to be a solid red pick. So is Iowa, Missouri, Kansas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, South Carolina, Kentucky, West Virginia, and Indiana. So here is our map if we look just at the solid states and the solid blue states. Now let's fill in our likely Democratic numbers, and here is going to have some subjectivity. In our likely column, as of right now, we have seen recent polling that shows, or sorry, this should be solid. We have seen recent polling that shows the Maine at-large district Kamala winning by 9 points. Now, do I believe that will hold? No, simply because it seems like Kamala Harris is going to do much, much worse than Joe with white working class voters, which is a huge portion of Maine at large. So I'm going to go put it as likely D for now. However, this could change easily. Likely D as well is going to be Colorado. Too much of an educated population for Donald Trump really to break through, especially with the removal of Kamala Harris or as Joe Biden on the ticket. And the final likely will be New Jersey. Now, New Jersey, there has been polling that has been showing Donald Trump up in the state of New Jersey. However, that was before Joe exited the race. We will see how this sort of shifts. If it shifts in Trump's favor, maybe new polling will come out that'll show this race still being in Trump's favor, but I doubt it. I have a feeling that Kamala Harris will have an easier time, especially with education differences in the state of New Jersey. Let's talk about likely Republican states. So, firstly, let's talk about the state of Florida. This one, I believe Trump could win it as high, maybe by 10, but I'm going to say around 9 to 6 points. And by the way, for all those who are watching, 5 to 10 is going to be our likely margin, and 10 plus is solid, and we're not going to do tilts because tilts is kind of a wishy-washy thing, but we'll say lean is anywhere between 0 to 5. Let's talk about the state of Texas. This state is most definitely going for Donald Trump. Again, we might see, I've expected between 6 to 9 points in the state of Texas, maybe even solid between Florida and Texas, which will be redder this election. I think could be up for debate. We could see a scenario where Trump wins Florida by 9 and Texas by 8 or something like that. So we're going to have some interesting differences compared to past elections where Texas votes much more Republican than Florida. We might see our first election in a while where Florida votes more Republican than Texas. Next, let's move to North Carolina. North Carolina has been polling polling likely Republican for a while now in the averages, and it seems as if though Donald Trump will win it by a likely margin. Now, could he win it by 4? Possibly, but I doubt it, and the polling would be consistent with that not being the case. Next up is the state of Arizona. This state will actually scratch that. We're going to remove that. We're gonna put the state of Ohio. The state of Ohio is highly likely to go by a safe margin, but I estimate a win by 9 points instead of something like 10. Simply because polling has not been as favorable for Donald Trump, like in the state of Iowa, which has consistently shown Trump above double digits, 15, 18, 13. It looks like he'll win this by a solid margin, which will be, again, a reversal of what is a historical trend of Iowa being a swing state. Now let's go into our lean Democratic margins. First up, New Hampshire. New Hampshire is a state that is highly educated, and the vote there by Joe Biden dropping out will likely tilt more in Kamala's favor. This state could have probably gone red if it was Joe Biden on the ticket simply because of education hurting Joe Biden in that regard. But I think Kamala Harris will do better with educated voters. Again, from the early tea leaves of these polls that Kamala Harris has a bump in, we have no idea what's going to happen. The race could totally revert itself, and Kamala could actually do worse than Joe Biden, but we don't know as of right now. You also have to keep into account the enthusiasm advantage that Donald Trump has over Kamala Harris. A quite big one. People voted for Donald Trump in 2 elections past, and people have not voted for Kamala Harris. Even in the primary, she didn't win a single delegate, so keep that in mind. Next, let's go to we're going to go to Virginia. This state was also in the RCP average as being favorable for Trump barely, which is again a complete reversal to 2020 where Joe Biden won Virginia by seven points or more. This is huge since the state of Virginia almost looked like it was going to go Republican. Now, with Kamala Harris on the ticket again, I expect those educated voters that are highly populated in the state of Virginia to come out and support her in a sense. But again, we could see these trends in the early polls sort of reverse themselves and have major differences. And that's the benefits of a Kamala ticket, is that you sort of are able to be certain, or more so certain, that you're going to hold these northeastern states by bigger margins. A state like New York or New Jersey and Colorado and California was never going to be a likely Republican state, but you're bleeding less voters in the national average, and you're also ensuring that you're going to hold on to these states by decent enough margins that you don't have to worry about them in a campaign scenario. However, when we talk about certain other areas of the country, let's go to our last lean Democrat state, and that is going to be New Mexico. And that could change. New Mexico is one that's going to be hard. If Trump's able to get certain projected Hispanic vote shares, he could narrowly eke out the state of New Mexico. However, we will see. That'll be interesting. The state of New Mexico is a dark horse pick. If you want to pick a state that Trump is going to magically flip, pick New Mexico. All right, let's talk about leaning Republican. Let's go to the state of Georgia. Now, Georgia, the Atlanta suburbs are seemingly reverting themselves, or the sort of demographic trends across the country. And people don't get this a lot, but the demographic trends that occur nationally actually do affect a lot of these states. Certain education gaps and whatnot, and racial groups do impact the vote shares in a lot of these areas. If you see something like, again, Trump winning 45% or 50% of the Hispanic vote, or something crazy like that, he wins the state of New Mexico. But you'll also see if Trump wins 25% of the black vote, that you're going to have states be a lot more favorable for Republicans, like New York, like New Jersey, but that educated vote in those states sort of held it back from, or with this Kamala Harris, which seems to hold them back from being possible flips. Now, the state of Georgia, on the other hand, it looks like a lot of those 2020 trends that had Joe Biden win the state narrowly eke it out seem to be reverting themselves back to a 2016 era, maybe even 2012, closer to that sort of vote share, and that's enormous for Donald Trump in the state of Georgia. And this state could easily go to a likely margin, would not be surprised, but as of right now, it's going to be lean. Now, next up is the state of Arizona. Arizona could also go by a likely margin. It is a state that has trended blue in the past few years. However, it looks as if for this election, Arizona will probably vote Republican again. And that'll be a big difference compared to the Senate races that we've seen in 2022 or otherwise. And so this will be good for Republicans. However, this shift might not last. Who knows? Maybe Arizona becomes sort of a bluer state in the future, but for this election, it seems like Trump will hold the state of Arizona, and that those Hispanic vote shares are curbing sort of the suburban educated vote losses that Donald Trump endured in 2020, and are not going to endure probably as much this election, but are definitely they are padding that sort of Hispanic popularity that Donald Trump has and popularity with minority groups. Next, the state of Nevada. This state is, it could possibly go by likely margin. I doubt it. It's unlikely. The state of Nevada also has a huge Hispanic population, so if Donald Trump has a good night with Hispanics, he might get a likely margin in Nevada. However, it's clear by polling data that, yeah, Joe Biden hasn't led the state of Nevada in a long time in a poll, and it's certainly one of those states that Republicans usually overperform or underperform their polls, and this is why it's a lean state. However, in 2020, we saw the polls were exactly accurate, and that was always the underperformance was due to the Hispanic vote share that Democrats would pull off. But again, in states, in that hidden Hispanic vote share, but that Hispanic vote share does not exactly is not going to translate into this election, as the Hispanic vote share is going to be much less for the Democratic side and much more for Republicans, and that's how you're winning states like Florida by likely margins. And who knows? Ron DeSantis did it, but Trump might flip Miami-Dade County in Florida, which again is a big turnaround, as it was one of the counties that Hillary Clinton had to do well in to win in 2016. She didn't do all that great, and that's why it flipped. The state of Florida flipped. Now let's talk about Nebraska second. It is one of those counties that we haven't had much polling, and that's not going to be really accurate. But if you look at the sort of national environment that we expect, it is I believe it is a lean margin in Nebraska's second district. Now you'll see, polling is going to be a little bit all over the place, but in the second district, it seems like Donald Trump is going to pull it out. And over here, we get to 269 votes. Now, we could have a scenario where Kamala Harris somehow, well, it's unlikely now because Joe Biden, I would have believed, somehow held onto these states and got Nebraska second, and that would determine the election and get them to 270. But I don't believe now that Kamala Harris really has much of a shot in all of these states again, and it's made her chances worse in Minnesota. Someone like Joe Biden, who had a lot of support in the state of Minnesota and a lot of support in the Rust Belt, good old Scranton Joe Biden, who was a big union guy, well, now you replace him with Kamala Harris, who is a rebrand of Hillary Clinton, just probably worse on a lot of the sort of popularity issues, and someone who has not appealed to unions in the same sort of breath that Joe Biden has. Combine that with a J.D. Vance ticket, who's one of the most pro-union Republican senators, and you have a sort of disaster in this Rust Belt area, and you might even see some shifts. Again, the sleepers in this election, or the eastern sleepers, the states that to watch out for margin-wise are these three states: Connecticut, New York, and New Jersey. Now, we will see if the sort of trends stay, or Kamala Harris actually doesn't seem to do better in these states. But beforehand, it really seemed like some these states would be a lot closer, with a New York being likely, Connecticut possibly being likely, and a New Jersey being lean or red. That is unlikely to happen at this point, in my opinion. However, these states will definitely be a lot closer than they were in 2020. And if you're going to see a popular vote share for Donald Trump, you're going to see it come from gains made in this sort of area of the country, and across the country in other areas too. But in these sort of deep blue states, you're going to see that gains happen. In Illinois, you might get a likely Illinois. I wouldn't count on it, but we will see. But as of the next lean state, the state of Minnesota, Minnesota isn't going to be the most lean out of all of these, and Nebraska second is probably going to be the closest, if not the one to flip blue. But these sort of Minnesota, I believed it would have voted for Joe Biden had he been on the ticket simply because of his union support. But Kamala Harris is a totally different candidate, a totally different animal in that sort of sense, that you cannot expect the same white working class voters who supported Joe Biden and returned to the Democrats under Joe Biden's leadership in 2020 to support Kamala Harris in the same breath. And that is going to be a huge problem, especially in the Rust Belt. And Kamala Harris' strategy seems to be more of a Sun Belt strategy, but again, these states seemed long gone during this election, and it only made sense to try to hold the Rust Belt. But who knows, maybe her VP pick or something helps her figure out a path to 270. But already Trump has won the election. Let's go and fill in the remainder. Wisconsin. Wisconsin is one of the two states. Actually, it's polling better than Michigan for Republicans for once in a while. Wisconsin always polls terribly for Republicans, and yet it has seemed Trump has held it consistently in the state of Wisconsin. If we go by polling errors, Wisconsin's polling error was about 4 in 2016, 6 in 2020, and that sort of polling error would make Wisconsin a likely state in this election. However, I am going to assume that the polls will be magically more right this time and that Trump will win it in a lean election. He might not, and they might be wrong. The state of Michigan, you're going to see sort of a polling error that could possibly favor Donald Trump. It's probably not going to be all that much, but 1 or 2 points, which will be in his favor. Now, this state is going to be one of the more blue ones out of these 4, besides Minnesota, but you could even make the case that Minnesota and Michigan are going to vote very similar in this election. However, we will see. I still predict Michigan to vote to the right of Minnesota. If Minnesota votes to the right of Michigan, though, it'll be an interesting election and a funny one. Now, the state of Pennsylvania, I also predict as a lean margin. If Trump's gains in sort of New York and New Jersey sort of hold the mid-Atlantic area, the eastern part of Pennsylvania is going to vote very much similarly to those states. And you could see races being more of a likely margin in the state of Pennsylvania simply because of these eastern voters along this sort of area right here. Now, to be clear, a lot of these sort of national popular votes have some weird situations going up in this mid-Atlantic region where some say Trump is up, some say it's Biden plus like in single digits. Again, you're going to see some freaky stuff out of these 3 areas. The one place to watch, which is going to be the most interesting place to watch, is going to be New Jersey and New York and the great state of Connecticut. So you'll see interesting things go on there. But the state of Pennsylvania is probably going to be lean, if not likely. Again, Wisconsin, I predict, will vote to the right of Pennsylvania, but the polls show it the opposite. But the polls have been wrong about the sort of relationship between these 2 states in elections. Again, Wisconsin was seen as the least favorable in 2016, the least favorable in 2020, yet that was Trump's most favorable state in both of those elections out of these 3. And the state of Michigan has been consistently Trump's least favorable, and it seemed like it's taken a leftward shift in a certain way, but I still believe Trump will eke it out maybe by 2 to 3 points in the state of Michigan, and he will win the election. And what it looks like as of today, 323 electoral votes, and that'll be very interesting.